So you end up with the wealth economy being something independent of the real economy of production and consumption. And Marx discussed this in volume 3 of Capital, where he discusses finance. And he says, money and debt and credit grow by purely mathematical laws. There was interest-bearing debt already in 2500 BC, long before there was industrial capitalism. There was debt throughout Greece and Rome. That's what essentially bankrupted antiquity. The debt grows by the mathematics of compound interest that are independent of the ability to pay. So the first thing to recognize is that the economy is wrapped in a kind of surrounding shell of debt that extracts income from it in the form of debt service. Think of it as a parasite extracting from the host. And the parasite is extracting more, but the parasite is growing much faster than the host. And at a certain point, it extracts so much revenue, so much life from the industrial economy that there's a crash. And that was Marx's theories of crises in the 19th century. I think that most Marxists today, certainly in the United States, I don't know about China, focus on volume 1 of Capital, where Marx talks about what he said that was his addition to classical economics, where he's talking about the employers, the industrialists' exploitation of wage labor, selling its products at a markup. But Marx did that because he thought that the other economists before him had already solved the problem of rent. Marx thought that capitalism was going to evolve into socialism once it had got rid of feudalism, once it had got rid of the landlord class, once it had got rid of the predatory banking class and industrialized banking, once it had developed government public ownership. And all of this, he said, was leading, paving the way to socialism, to simply take over when it took over at the point when it decided that it wanted the whole economy to grow together instead of just concentrating all of the wealth at the top of the economic pyramid in the wealthiest 1% of the economy. So the classical idea of a free market was one free from economic rent, not free for landlords, monopolists, and creditors. The whole idea of a free market to classical economics is the opposite of what the monopolists and propagandists call a free market today. And they can only get away with this turning the language upside down by not teaching the history of economic thought, by not teaching economic history. So the one thing that I want to do in these lectures to China is to review and revive this economic history and the kind of economic thought that was developed then. And as I said, it was developed largely by the conservatives in Britain. The conservative prime minister, Benjamin Disraeli, was the prime minister from 1874 to 1880. And he said, the health of the people is really the foundation upon which all their happiness and all their power as a state depend. And so he developed what became the national health system of Britain. The idea that you want to keep the labor force and the population healthy because it's very expensive to get sick and you miss work and you still have to pay. Well, right now, Donald Trump and the Americans are the opposite. The health of the people, the sickness of the people is the way that the health insurance industry and the drug makers can get rich. So that's the opposite philosophy. Do you want the health makers to get rich or do you want the people to be healthy? If you make healthcare take 18% of America's GDP, imagine what if China had to pay as much for its healthcare as the United States does, it wouldn't have any money to industrialize. All the money would go to the pharmaceuticals companies. Just as in the United States, if the workers have to pay so much for healthcare, so much for health insurance, so much for housing, how on earth can they compete with China? And that's what makes the conflict internationally today so different from just a conflict between two industrial countries. It's between industrialized China and a financialized, deindustrialized United States. So in the second part of this lecture, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to talk about how finance capitalism promotes rent seeking and opposes taxes, and how finance capitalism destroys industry and industrial capitalism. Well, this lecture is going to be about how finance capitalism is a promoter of rent seeking instead of industry. And the most wealth today is made by rent seeking. It's not made by building factories and making products. It's made by buying real estate and selling it at a profit, buying stocks and bonds and selling them at a profit. It's made by claims on the economy. And so finance is it protects the rights to private property. It also tries to cut taxes on wealth. The way that you get more money from real estate or stocks and bonds is you want the government to tax as little as possible. You want to shift the tax burden onto labor and onto industry, the exact opposite of what the classical tax policy was. And you want to get control of government. You want bribery. You want to buy control of the politicians by backing their political campaign so that they will pass laws and enact them in the courts to do things that help you. And again, the more money you make, this is called an increase in GDP, but it's the opposite of what the classical economics and Marx recommended. And in fact, instead of increasing public ownership since, let's say 1980 was the great change, the rentier interests, the financial, real estate, and insurance interests have regained much of the economic and political power that they seemed to be losing a century ago. Now, this counter-revolution is being led by the financial sector, and it really is a counter-revolution. Banking system centers have taken the lead in fighting against taxation. And most bank loans are collateralized by wealth. In order to get a loan to buy wealth, you have to have wealth that you pledge in the form of a house as collateral, or stocks and bonds, or your future ability to earn an income. And if you look at, make a diagram of how the economy works, the finance capital is based on what's called the FIRE sector: finance, insurance, and real estate, followed by monopolies. So the FIRE sector is really a symbiotic sector. Finance, insurance, and real estate are not part of the industrial economy. They're not part of producing wealth, but they're extracting revenue, extracting rent, extracting insurance charges, extracting interest and financial fees. And what it extracts are at the expense of the rest of the sector. So many people who studied Marx are familiar with exploitation under industrial capitalism by the industrialist. But finance capitalism has its own mode of exploiting labor. And essentially, labor has to pay interest and penalties. It has to pay health insurance, and it has to pay rents for home ownership, or else it has to pay mortgage debt for it. So finance capitalism exploits labor by probably a larger dollar amount than the industrial profits are. And that's why finance goes to where the industrial profits are. In the early 19th century, when Ricardo wrote, finance made its money on international trade. So of course it wanted to back the specialization of labor, and it didn't mainly make loans to real estate because the landlord class owned that. But once you democratized home ownership, once you said land is no longer going to be owned just by the people and families that conquered England or America, but by anybody can have their own home and buy real estate. All of this is bought on credit, and all of a sudden the whole rent sector that classical economics focused on has been turned into interest for the financial sector. And essentially, the aim is to control what people need so that whether you're a landlord or a drug manufacturer, you can say, our idea of the free market is your money or your life. Make a choice. Your free choice, you know, you can live in the street or you can borrow from us and have a home of your own. You can have a life of unemployment and poverty, or you can borrow from us and have an education so that you can afford to get a job. And then you can borrow more money to buy a car to drive to your job if you want to do that. So finance capital also helps industrial exploitation of labor, because once you can drive your labor force into mortgage debt and consumer debt and student debt and credit card debt, then all of a sudden, if you lose your job, you fall behind in these debt payments. And if you don't have the money to make your stipulated monthly payment on your credit card or your mortgage or your rent, then all of a sudden your credit rating goes down and the interest rate that you have to pay goes up to 29%. The GDP statistics in America say this is called financial service. And it's counted in GDP as the bank providing more services by taking the risk of having to charge you a higher and higher interest rate. Language is it's become Orwellian language, meaning you create a artificial vocabulary that means the opposite in print from what it used to mean. You've had the conquest of language. Now, healthcare has also become an increasingly important way of locking workers into their current jobs, because today most workers have their health insurance paid by their employer. Now, what that means is if you get fired, all of a sudden you don't have any health care anymore. And under the Obamacare program, you have to pay at least $6,000 per person to pay for your own health care without a job to pay. So workers are afraid of losing their job. And Alan Greenspan, the head of the Federal Reserve, explained to Congress that this is called the traumatized worker syndrome. Employers are afraid to form a union because they may be fired and lose their health care, and their credit card rates will go up. Or even if they complain about the job or unsafe working conditions, if they say, wait a minute, we want a mask so that we don't get the virus, they're considered a complainer, they're fired on the spot as a troublemaker, they all of a sudden don't have health care anymore, they're locked into the credit card debt, the mortgage debt, having to pay rent to a landlord, the health care, everything else. So finance capitalism locks employees into a traumatized, weak position where they're completely dependent. Now, the other point that I made in the earlier lecture is that finance capitalism is based on the mathematics of compound interest. It's an exponential growth in debt. Any interest rate is a doubling time. Any interest rate will double the debt in a given number of years. So economies can't grow as fast as the interest rate does. The rate of income growth for the last 10 years, ever since the Obama depression that he caused in 2009 by bailing out the banks instead of the indebted homeowners, wages haven't grown at all, but the debts have grown and grown and grown. So compound interest is what is vastly increasing the amount of debt. So every economy is like a Ponzi scheme. And a Ponzi scheme means you have to keep pouring more and more money into the scheme, in this case, into paying debt service, in order to keep the whole financial system from collapsing. And that's why the government now, the economy doesn't have any more money for people to pay the financial sector and their bank loans and mortgages when they work for restaurants that have been closed down, businesses that have been closed down. So the government is now printing the money and giving it to the banks and buying stocks and buying bonds and buying mortgage loans. so that all of a sudden you have to keep the debt growing faster than the economy in order to prevent a crash. But in the end, there is a crash. So all finance capitalist economies have to crash. That's inherent in the mathematics of compound interest. And more than any other economist of the 19th century, Marx spelled out what everybody had written about compound interest up to his time in volume 3 of Capital. Now, the fact that you know that the economy is going to collapse in the end means that the time frame of finance capitalism is short term compared to industrial capitalism. If deindustrialization is how you make your money, if you make money by lending money to a corporate raider, and the raider buys a company, fires a labor force, says we can't afford to pay your pensions anymore, or we're going to go bankrupt. That wipes out your pensions, and we're going to pay the pensions to ourselves as management fees and dividends. Then obviously you're going to leave an empty shell in your wake. Well, that's what the whole financial rating process of the 1980s did. That's what the junk bond and the bank fraud movement of the 2000s did, as the junk mortgage loans of SNL frauds of the 1980s did. You know the economy is going to collapse, so you grab the money and run, and you empty it out as fast as you can, and then you move it to an offshore banking center, a tax enclave, usually in the Cayman Islands or Panama, or you launder it so it appears to be offshore and nobody can find it anymore. So money laundering and the concealment of the wealth that you've emptied out the economy from is a key. Instead of industrial engineering, then, you have financial engineering. You don't have to spend all the time that it takes to develop a new product, to organize its production and its marketing strategy. All you have to do is take over a company that already has all this, and then you just empty it out. The Chicago Tribune newspaper was bought out by a real estate magnate who essentially had put the workers' pensions into Tribune stock, bid it all up, emptied out the company by paying himself, and then wiped out all of the workers' pension savings. And that's been the norm for the last 30 years in the United States. One of the easiest ways of finance capitalism to make money is to wipe out the workers' pension funds. And you can do this, again, finance capital grows by compound interest faster than the real economy. And this compound interest paid to the financial sector, what does it do with the money? Well, it buys other assets. When the banks in America don't lend to factories to be built, they don't lend to increase the means of production. They will let companies pledge their assets as collateral. They will have a mortgage on the factory buildings, on some of the machinery, but it won't lend anything to create money or to create capital. So what the financial sector does, it takes more and more of its interest and capital gains, it makes more loans, and it'll lend more and more of the proportion of a housing price, for instance, to borrowers. When 50 years ago, when I bought my first house in New York, the rule of thumb was banks would, the buyer had to come down with 1/3 of the money as a down payment. And the mortgage, a bank wouldn't lend you a mortgage to buy a house that absorbed more than 1/4 of your income. And that meant that everybody could afford to buy a house that would self-amortize, that is, pay itself off in 30 years. And you could, every white person, if you were black, you couldn't get the loan. You wouldn't even be allowed to buy a house in most neighborhoods. But if you're a white person in America, you were able to spend 1/4 of your income buying a house that would pay off, and you would own the house free and clear, no mortgage, after 30 years, which is about your remaining working life. Well, gradually, as the financial sector made more and more money, it lent more and more until by 2008, when the real estate crisis came, down to today, the Federal and Mortgage Housing Authority will insure government mortgages that absorb up to 43% of the borrower's income. Well, instead of paying a quarter of your income for a mortgage, you now have to pay 43% to afford the higher price. And you don't have to have any down payment at all. You don't have to save up any money. You can buy 0 down payment, and you don't even have to pay the interest. There will be the, you don't have to pay off the mortgage in 30 years. It's called no amortization mortgage, or interest only mortgage. All of the money you pay for the mortgage will only pay the interest, so you don't build up your equity at all. That is your home ownership. You begin with almost no home ownership, and you never gain the home ownership. And this has occurred on so widely a scale that over half the value of average real estate in the United States is owed to the banks. So what people nominally own their homes, but the real owner that owns claims for more than half the home is the mortgage banking sector. However, the homeowner, not the banker, is responsible for paying the real estate taxes, for paying the upkeep, for paying the water and sewer fees, the electrical fees, and for paying the insurance to make sure that the home isn't wiped out, so that if the home does lose, the bank will get repaid, the homeowner will get wiped out by the insurance, but at least the banker will be repaid by the insurance policy that the homeowner has to borrow and take out is a condition for getting the mortgage to begin with. So you have the financial sector using all of its compound interest, all of this exponential growth in debt service to lend on more and more, to buy assets, to buy more stocks and bonds, to bid up stock prices, to lower bond prices, to raise real estate prices, and to buy other assets like fine arts, Andy Warhol etchings, anything that is an asset, that a trophy that can be something. Well, obviously, as you all know, the real estate and financial markets collapsed in 2008. And at that point, the government came in with the Federal Reserve Bank with what's called quantitative easing, meaning they created the money to simply pay the banks. When the debtors couldn't afford to pay the debts at compound interest, when they couldn't keep the Ponzi scheme going, the role of the banks was to essentially finance, the central bank was to finance the commercial banking sector to make sure that the creditors and the 1% didn't lose any money. And earlier in this year, 2020, when the Trump administration passed the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, they sent $1,200 to every American whose family earned less than $180,000 per year. Now, they then did a survey. What did people do with this $1,200 a piece? Well, most of the money was usually put into the banks. So the recipients of this $1,200 coronavirus money, because the government knew they were unemployed, they weren't making as much money before, they simply paid down the debt. They didn't use it to buy more goods and services. They didn't use it to revive the economy. And in fact, the economy kept shrinking. And that's essentially the economy now is continuing to shrink, and nobody knows what's going to happen in January when the debts and the rents and the mortgage money that people haven't been paying all summer long during the virus and the unemployment, when all of a sudden that comes through. So what has emerged from all of this, when you put together all of these ways of finance capital making money, you realize that finance capitalism is a form of central planning. But the aim of the central planning is to make asset price gains or finance capital gains, not profits, not higher living standards, not more goods and services, not to expand the economy and expand the market, not to build more housing. It's just to It's to make more money for the 1% because the 1% has gained control of the government. Just as they've privatized infrastructure and the communication system and they're privatizing education, they've privatized the government. And in the United States, the government is basically put up for sale to the campaign contributors. And the case went to the Supreme Court that passed the Citizens United law that said, yes, corporations are people. And just as a person can contribute, a corporation can contribute to financial campaigns. And in the United States, not only are politicians elected by buying television time to run commercials and organizing campaigns paid for by their financial contributors, mainly on Wall Street in the real estate sector, but the people vote according to what the newspapers and the television stations tell them. That's all privatized. And even judges, even the courts, the judges have to be elected in the United States. So the judges have been, their campaigns are financed by the financial sector that wants the judges to either remake the law to favor finance capitalism, not labor capitalism, not socialism, and not industrial capitalism, but finance capitalism. But even if the law is against monopolies, even if the law is in favor of the renters, not the landlords, the courts are corrupt. One movie after another in Hollywood is made to show corrupt judges, corrupt courts, the corrupt police force. The government is corrupted by the financial system. And that corruption is called financial efficiency, in taking over the government to plan so that finance can treat, if you pollute the land, if you have an oil spill, if you create a disease, unsafe working conditions, and you kill people, you may have to spend, I think the average is $5 for every worker you kill. And $1 for every $1 million worth of land that you destroy. You make, breaking the law is a cost of doing business. And that's why lawyers are so important along with judges under finance capitalism. It's a legalistic society where if you can control the courts, then it doesn't matter what the law says. You can control the application of the law. And this used to be called corrupting the law, but now it's called modernizing or financializing the legal system. So the dynamic of finance capitalism is just the opposite of employing wage labor. It's the opposite of the classical economic idea of taxing finance and real estate and taxing monopolies or preventing them. Finance capital seeks to avoid paying taxes, make the labor pay the taxes, not the landlords, not the absentee owners. Donald Trump has just released his tax returns, and he claims to have billions of dollars and paid only $750 in income tax. If you look at statistics for the real estate sector in the United States since 1945, the real estate sector pays hardly any income tax at all because it's given all sorts of tax breaks that we'll talk about in lecture 4 later. Essentially, you have financial capitalism turning classical economics inside out, but rolling history back to feudalism. We're moving back to a feudal society. So what is called moving forward to the post-industrial society, moving into a financial society, is really moving backwards into a feudal society of neo-serfdom or debt peonage, where the workers, in order to get a job and an education and housing, you have to buy everything at the company store that controls the prices. You have to go so deeply into debt that you're essentially a debt peon. It's a little different from serfdom. In serfdom, the serfs were tied to the land and they couldn't move. And when a landlord might choose to sell the land, he'd sell the serfs with it. Well, right now, the debt peons can live wherever they want in America. But wherever they decide to move, they're going to have to subject themselves to the same debt peonage, to buy a house on mortgage credit, to pay for an education, to pay for a car loan, to balance their budget by taking out credit card debt, and to live on debt. They have to go so deeply into debt that they lose their economic liberty. They lose their ability to choose. And seemingly scientific statistics show all of this as being progress and actually making money. And post-classical economic statistics define all income and wealth as being earned by contributing to production. This is the revolution against classical economics and hence against Marxism that occurred in the 1890s. The economic theory of John Bates Clark and the Austrians and the other post-classical economists said any way of making money is just as productive as making money in any other way. Making money by rent, making money by lending money to people in foreclosing, making money by creating a monopoly and charging a monopoly price is just as productive as starting a factory. Making money by crime is the most productive at all, but hypocritically, crime is not included in the financial statistics unless it's committed by a billionaire. If a billionaire does it, it's not crime. But if a poor person steals money from a store, he can go to jail. That's crime. But if a rich rentier makes money by exploiting people, that's called creating wealth. And the economic statistics count that as a creation of wealth. For instance, when your home price rises in value, when new buyers of homes have to pay more for a home, the value of the home, if you were to rent to yourself, if you were a home actually your own landlord renting to yourself, that's counted as part of GDP. 8% of GDP is that amount. And when banks and credit card companies raise their penalty rates to 29%, that's, as I mentioned, called financial services. That increase in the interest rate charge is in addition to GDP. When rents go up, people lose their home and large real estate monopolies like Blackstone Company buy up these houses, charge more for rent, that the increased rent is counted as increased GDP. So the financial sector creates an entirely different picture of reality and statistical picture of reality than classical economics did in the 19th century. And they claim that, you see, here it is in numbers, we have it to the decimal point. If it's in numbers, it has to be scientific. And that's why what we're doing is called scientific economics. Well, this is all double talk. I could have done this whole lecture as a comedy show, and it probably would have got a large audience, but you have such absurdity that the book I wrote, J is for Junk Economics, is all about the economic vocabulary. And if you've read George Orwell's 1984, and you know what doublethink is, you realize that all of this is basically, if you can control the vocabulary, you can control how people think about what is happening, and you can make them think that even as they're getting poor, they're somehow getting richer because their home is rising in price, even as this entails more and more debt service, more and more taxes, and it's making them poorer and poorer, but somehow the statistics tell them they're getting richer, and who are you going to believe? The statistics are your actual experience. And people are more willing to believe the statistics and what people tell them they're feeling than how they actually feel. Well, what happens? You're having a lot of drug abuse here. You having America going through what China went through with the opium wars in the 19th century, except the opium wars are now being waged by the drug sector against the domestic economy. That's where the money is being made. Opium and pharmaceuticals. The death rate from opium overdose is going way up. Lifespans are shortening here. That's one of the demographic effects of finance capitalism. And if you want to look at where America and much of Europe is going, look at what happened to Greece in the last 5 or 6 years, ever since it had to pay the foreign debt that the IMF loaded it down with. Greece had to suffer austerity, its population shrank, lifespans shrank, and more Greeks emigrated. Same thing happened to Russia after 1991, and it adopted neoliberal economics. The economy shrank, employment shrank, people were impoverished, they got sick, and it ended up with President Putin saying that more Russians lost their lives as a result of the neoliberalism sponsored by the United States than lost their lives in World War II. And finance capitalism, therefore, has become the new way of economic warfare. It's a way of destroying other countries economically and demographically, and essentially ending up grabbing their property, just like wars used to be about grabbing the land and natural resources. That's what imperialism was all about. But in 1991, in the 1990s, American and European imperialism worked financially by neoliberalizing the Soviet Union, Russia, and the other Soviet economies. So to summarize what I'm saying, prices for housing, the cost of education, medical care, they're all inflated on bank credit. And that obliges workers to go deeper and deeper into debt, but it's all counted as an increase in GDP. And even though economies are getting more indebted and getting poorer, the economics textbooks say this is how you increase wealth. Well, it turns out you're only increasing wealth for the 1%, but the economy is really all about the 1%. It's not about the rest of the economy. And so the question is, who are you going to run the economy for? Are you going to run it for the 1%? You're going to run it for the 99%. And I think the best way to contrast industrial capitalism to finance capitalism is to divide the economy into two parts. That is to divide the private sector into two parts. The production and economy and consumption economy is wrapped in separate from the fire sector. Finance, insurance, and real estate is a parasite on the industrial sector. And the question is, where is the private sector's money going to go? Is it going to go to the parasite, or is it going to go to the industrial host economy? And I explain all this in detail in my book, Killing the Host, because that's what the financial economy does. It kills the industrial host and ends in a crash. The objective is to create a crash, to take all your money and run, get it somewhere else, and you've emptied out the economy, and then you go into another economy. So it's all about making capital gains and extracting capital. Margaret Thatcher's policy was, in a nutshell, once she got rid of England's public housing, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry you lost your job. I hope you made a killing buying British telephone stock and selling your house." People were given their community housing, public housing, and they ended up selling it because they needed to sell it to break even. They were able to buy telephone stock, and of course, then the telephone charges went way up, and their cost of living went way up. They privatized the public railroads, and all of a sudden, the railroad service went way down. The price went way up. They privatized the bus company, and a bus driver's family ended up buying the bus company on credit, and the wife became one of the richest women in England by just cutting back the bus lines that went to the smaller towns. Cut back the buses. We don't make enough profit there. Sell off the bus terminals that were conveniently located in the center of London so that everybody could get to the bus terminal to get to the job. Let's put the bus terminal way outside of London. So people have to take an expensive tube transport to get outside to London, to get to the faraway bus terminal, to go to where they're going. And life became much harder for the Brits, but it made a killing in the stock market for the people who bought the bus companies on credit and for the bankers who invested in the bus company and who privatized it and made money for the bus company to buy its rivals and create a bus monopoly. Well, I'm going to pick up the theme of this in the next lecture. And the next lecture is going to be the final, the characteristic of finance capitalism is to internationalize itself. If you're going to take the money out of the economies you wreck, you have to find a new economy to exploit. You've emptied out the US economy. Where are you going to put it? Well, they'd like to put the money in China and buying control of China and Vietnam, and like they bought control of much of Japanese auto companies. You want to extend their financial system over the whole world economy. And the whole Cold War II that we're seeing today is a Cold War between finance capitalism trying to expand itself into financial imperialism or free trade imperialism and take over other economies and prevent other economies from making wealth by industrial capitalism or industrial socialism, which is what China is doing. So the war between the United States and China is actually a war of economic systems. And you have the United States and its European satellites on the one hand, again, China, Russia, and the BRICS countries, India, Brazil, and any Iran, any other countries participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. I should understand that it's a fight between what kind of economic system the world is going to have. And Rosa Luxemburg, a century ago, a Marxist economist in Poland, put it briefly. She said, the fight is between socialism and barbarism. And that's what the Cold War is about. What kind of a world are we going to have? Are we going to have economic warfare that is won by the financial class and by getting the rest of the world into debt and imposing IMF austerity programs such as are imposed on Greece, on Argentina? And if a country votes socialist, as Chile did, then you overthrow the government, as Hillary Clinton overthrew the government of Honduras and turned it into a coup d'etat when the president wanted to do land reform. She said, you can't do land reform. Land reform is against America. We want to buy your land. We want to turn it into coffee export land and make export crops. We can't have land reform. We want the money, not your citizens. And if you fight us, we will kill you. She overthrew them, and America overthrew Bolivia, overthrew Ecuador. This is ultimately finance locks in its power, not simply by extracting interest, not simply by impoverishing the country, but by violence. That's how the senatorial class made its money in ancient Rome. It's how every country has ended up in a fight between a class that wants to get rich by grabbing the wealth of the country for itself, by impoverishing the country at large. So finance capitalism is not only a fight against socialism, it's also a fight against industrial capitalism, because industrial capitalism can only succeed, as China's succeeding, by public supply of basic needs and basic services, and finance capitalism wants to monopolize these public services. The reason they're public is because they're natural monopolies, like the post office, which there's pressure to monopolize in the United States. And in one sense, even though I've said industrial capitalism is internationalist, wanting to control the whole world, it's also very nationalist in the sense that it's centered in the United States. And the United States is a sponsor of finance capitalism because Wall Street basically is in control of the financial city of London, the Paris Bourse, the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. It's Wall Street that has become the central planner for central financial planning centers throughout the whole Western world. And that is the kind of global economy that is being juxtaposed to the Belt and Road Initiative and the kind of economy that China is trying to create as an alternative. And these dynamics are imposed specifically by the United States as their sponsors through the International Monetary Fund, where the United States has veto power, by the World Bank, and by NATO. And ultimately, US government officials have told me they can get European politicians to do whatever they want simply by bribing them. They say the good thing about European politics is it's all privatized. Politicians are in it to make money. How are you going to make money if you're a politician? You take a bribe from the United States to support policies that the United States supports, not German voters or Dutch voters or other NATO voter countries. Essentially, the politicians are run by the United States. And just to make sure that they don't double cross the briber, the United States tax their phones. For instance, a year or two ago, it became there was a uproar in Germany that America's taxing was tapping Angela Merkel's phone. Well, of course it's tapping it. It wants to make sure that Angela Merkel doesn't do what the head of Honduras did and make us have to overthrow her, make her have a heart attack or something. That sounds conspiratorial, but it's how the world works. Hollywood gets it right. This is not in the economics textbooks. The economics textbook doesn't say you lock in a free market by always controlling the police and the CIA, and sometimes you have to work covertly. That is not in the economic system. It's called externality, meaning it's external to the models, but it's not external to how the world works. When I was at Chase Manhattan, one of the people reporting to Chase of their sending letters every week was the Archduke von Habsburg, who would send reports on what's happening through everywhere. And I was actually in charge of receiving this intelligence and spreading it to the rest of the economics department. And every Friday afternoon, we were all getting pretty tired of the week, and I'd pull out his reports and I'd read it, and it was like the movie of the week. It was like a thriller about all of the covert espionage and dirty tricks that were being done all over the world. And I guarantee you that the bankers not only know what's happening, but reciprocally, almost all bankers are where intelligence operatives want to be placed. When I was at Chase, the office right across the hall from me, there was a man from naval intelligence there, whose job was to collect all of the bank intelligence that was of interest to naval intelligence. My best friend at Chase had come from military intelligence. Most of the higher officers were naval intelligence. So the banks and the intelligence agencies and the government are all intertwined to make sure that the world is going to follow a financialized system. So all of these lectures, 11 lectures, are moving towards the end, which is going to be, how do you reverse where the world is going? How do you change the direction that the world is moving towards financial imperialism and free trade imperialism? Well, it's going to require deprivatization. You're going to have to reclaim natural monopolies for the public domain. That was the fight of the 19th century. You're going to have to get rid of the financial class. That means there's only one way to free your labor force and to free your industry and free your population from debt peonage. You have to wipe out the debt. That means the good part of wiping out the debt is you wipe out the savings of the 1%. If you don't wipe out the savings of the 1%, you're going to leave them in the same position that the House of Lords was in England and that the feudal aristocracy was in. You're going to leave the 1% with all the wealth in the world. You have to, by canceling the debts, you wipe out savings on the other side of the balance sheet, because one person's debt is another party's saving. And the debts that the 99% owe are the savings and the wealth of the 1%. You have to be able to think of both sides of the balance sheet at once. It's a different kind of thinking that's taught in the economics textbooks, because they only talk about the real economy, the production and consumption economy. They don't talk about the debt and asset side of the economy. They don't talk about the balance sheet aspects of the economy. That's what I'm going to try to spell out, and that's what the books that I write are all about. My super imperialism is translated into Chinese, along with my trade theory, but none of my historical, right, none of my description of how the US economy works, none of my economic theories. I've done a few articles for the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, but the basic books have not been translated. And it's necessary to realize that in order to have a Marxist economy, that includes everything that was leading into Marxism. That includes the classical economics of Adam Smith and Ricardo and John Stuart Mill, who said that landlords make money in their sleep. We don't want a landlord class making money in sleep. We want everybody to make money by being awake, by working, and by doing something productive for society. That's what the society you have to create. But to do that takes the same kind of political revolution today that occurred in the 19th century. And remember, the 19th century classical economic revolution failed. It failed in the 1890s. It failed by World War I. And instead of achieving the free market that Adam Smith and the classical economists wanted, you had a financialized market of the kind that Marx described in volume 2 and 3 in Capital, hoping that the European countries would be able to pave the way for socialism by freeing themselves from the rentier economy and the financial economy. But they didn't do it. They didn't free themselves. And that really is the task of today. It's to recover what the 19th century classical evolution was all about, creating a tax system and a public infrastructure system that led naturally to socialism. Well, China's already done this. It's already done the most important thing by having the financial system already in the public domain. It's easy to cancel the debts when you're canceling debts to yourself. China can do it. But that can't be done in the West because the debts are owed to private bankers that have the economic power and political power to prevent governments from interfering with them. And all China can do with its allies is to create a socialist economic system that will essentially leave the West either to move into a financial collapse until it looks like Greece and Argentina, or like the United States will be looking in January, or to say, well, if China can do it, we can do it too. That's going to be what the balance of the 21st century is all about.
It's such a beautiful country. It is a crime. There is so much corruption.
It's really everywhere.
Indonesia has one of the last remaining tropical forests. If you talk about Indonesia as the producer of oxygen of the world, everyone actually is the victim. We need that tropical forest to be protected. We need that tropical forest not to be the source of corruption. Corruption is everywhere. Corruption has been likened to a disease that is really eating the whole country and suffocating us. It hampers the country's ability to serve its people.
The corruption is so chronic here in Indonesia that the public services that should be the rights of the civilians, of the people, are not being given. All the people in below economic class, they don't have the money to pay the bribe or the embezzlement and doesn't have proper public services. All the public officials, most of them are pretty corrupt.
For example, the family of the mayor, they have more than 40 luxurious cars. They go abroad, they buy in high-class boutique, but within 20 kilometers, there are people who cannot eat.
So I think there is an acknowledgement from the government that we have a problem. You actually have young people, and most of them are young people, ready to put their life in danger, fighting against corruption.
Where are you, Mr. President?
It has become very personal to me to fight corruption because I'm just sick of these people getting whatever they want just because they have the authority.
So that is why it's very risky. They have money, they have political networking, and they have power to interfere. We should use the law as our tool to fight with the authoritarian regime.
For me, I just want to obey this constitution. I don't care who you are. That's very important for this country.
So ICW is the most important organization working on this issue head on.
In ICW, all of us is young people below 40. They are lawyers, teachers, mathematicians, biologists. We have a different background, but we have the same dream about how to use our skills to combat corruption.
But more importantly, they also work on a minute, real, practical level. They look at papers, they look at numbers, they look at budget, they look at planning, they look at implementation.
We investigate the case, we find the facts, we use scientific methods, and then we do press conference about that. So we really trying a different strategy. We are campaigning, we are watchdog, but we also have recommendations that can be implemented.
One day Indonesia will no corruption.
Indonesia need ICW.
This is not about yourself or your own country. This is about the whole world. We have to work hand in hand.
For the sake of the people, I want it to be a better place for all of us.
Indonesia Corruption Watch.